Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of the Honorable Minister of Energy, we want to thank you for this opportunity, to Mr. President and his team for allowing us to make this short presentation. I'm Anthony Jajra, Director PPME at the Ministry of Energy. And I'm here with my colleague, Engineer Mau, who is the Deputy Director in charge of power, and then the Director of Finance, who is also a lawyer, Mr. Koko Boedu, and Callistus Nero, a director, a staff at the Petroleum Directorate of the Ministry. Energy transition has become a very phenomenal issue in the world now. The world says they are transiting, they are moving on. And what is the world moving out from? We are moving from dirty fuel to cleaner fuel. The harm carbon dioxide has been causing to the atmosphere, to the climate, is something if we don't do anything about, this world is going to be in a mess. So the world has decided that we should move on. And if the world is moving on, then Ghana must also do something about it. We cannot say we won't move on. Whether you like or not, they will move on. Somebody said, during the Stone Age, it's not like stone got finished, that's why we move on. And during the Iron Age, it's not like iron got finished, that's why we moved on. The world just moved on. So the world will definitely move on. And Ghana must prepare to move with the world. So the Minister of Energy set up a committee to draft the energy transition plan. The Vice President launched it in February 2022, and we've gone through the whole country, meeting many stakeholders. We've met the National House of Chiefs, Queen Mothers Association, charcoal sellers, everybody, market women. The Chief Justice allowed us to meet the judges in Kumasi and in Accra. And lastly, we were able to meet the Council of State. Honorable member was there, and we made a presentation to them. As lawyers, we told ourselves that we must let our colleague lawyers also know about this. So we wrote to the association to give us a slot during the conference. So thankfully, they've given us a slot, and we are here. So thank you so much. The Ghana is a signatory to the Paris Agreement, which together as the international world, we've agreed to move on and transit. Especially at COP26, this thing came up strongly. The International Renewable Energy Agency defines energy transition as the pathway toward transformation of the global energy sector from fossil-based fuel to zero carbon by the second half of the century. That is the aim. And the International Energy Agency, in its the Zero Agenda report, says that by 2021, no new oil and gas fields should be approved for development. No new coal mine extensions should be tolerated. But of course, because of the Ukraine war, they are mining coal now. By 2025, no new sales of fossil boilers. By 2030, all new buildings are zero carbon ready. 60% of global car sales are electric. And there will be a phase out of unabated coal in developed economies. By 2035, all new appliances are best in class. 50% of heavy trucks are electric or low carbon fuels. No new internal combustion engine car sales. Overall net zero emission in electricity will be advanced in the advanced economies. By 2040, 50% of existing buildings will be retrofitted to zero carbon levels. 50% of aviation fuel will be low carbon and net zero emission electricity rich globally. By 2045, 50% of heating demand will be met by heat pumps. And by 2050, 50% of existing buildings will be retrofitted to zero levels carbon. 90% of heavy industrial production in low emissions. Now, based on that, some countries have taken some decision. UK government has pledged not to support funding for oil and gas projects. It has also adopted a policy to end the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in the UK by 2030. So by 2030, there won't be any sale of IC vehicles in the UK. The US government has halted new oil and natural gas leases on public lands and waters and began a thorough review of existing permits for fossil fuel development. In 2019, the World Bank announced that it will stop financing upstream oil and gas projects. In November 2020, the European Investment Bank announced its policy to stop all fossil fuel lending, including gas, by the end of 2021. A group of 457 investors, which oversees more than $41 trillion in assets combined, have committed to net zero. And a coalition group of 79 company CEOs have called on the G7, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and UK and US to work harder in reducing greenhouse emissions and cut funding for fuels. The major international oil companies, under shareholder and legal pressure, have all adopted emission reduction targets and are cutting hydrocarbon production and transforming their companies. In 2020, BP announced its decision not to explore in new markets. Similarly, Shell announced that it will not undertake exploration in frontier areas after 2025. Now, these decisions by these developing countries and oil companies signify that energy transition is our doorstep. While we insist, our president said it at COP26, that we'll continue to develop, we'll continue to exploit our natural resources. We cannot be oblivious to what they are doing, because what they do will affect the country. And that is why we have done this. But now, after going around, we have a lot of modeling that's taking place. We have some targets as preliminary results, which we want to discuss with you. So we're not going to go through all the series. We're just going to pick some things just to show you for information that this is what Ghana is also planning to do. And I'm going to invite Engineer now to do a very short 15 minutes presentation to just show you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. And since I have only 5 minutes to present, I don't know how I'm going to go about this, but I'll do my best. Just to add to the statistics, according to the UNFFCC, global emissions have gone up by almost 90% in the last century. And when we take Ghana, for example, in the last 30 years, our emission has been increasing on annual average basis of 8%. So currently, Ghana is no longer a sink, but rather a net emitter. And we have to do something about this, just to add to what he said. So these are outcomes of the presentation. In terms of objectives, the first is that we want to identify a viable pathway that Ghana can follow in order to transition towards a carbon neutral economy. The second is for us to harness the opportunities, that we have in a fair and equitable manner as we transition. Then the third is for us to go to evaluate how this energy transition will be impacted in terms of jobs, revenue losses, social development, etc. The fourth is for us to go to come up with a plan that gives us a medium to long-term perspective as to how we would be transitioning. And then last but not the least is to estimate the cost of implementing the energy transition plan. We've done a number of modeling, and these are some of the key assumptions underlying the modeling. The first is that if we look at 2021, we started from 2021, our GDP is about 79 billion US dollars. Population is around 30.8 million. Urban share in terms of population living in urban areas and those in rural areas is about 56. And then in terms of our national electricity access, we are about 87%. Now, what do we have in mind moving into 2070? We are saying that by 2070, taking into account all the plans and programs that we have as a country, we should be having a GDP that is almost about 863 billion US dollars. Around that period, our population will be about 72 million people, and we'll have more of our population living in urban areas than rural, so about 85%. And in terms of electricity access, we should be able to achieve universal access, that's 99.8%. If we look at the average growths, these are within reasonable rates that we think as a country, if we push, we'll be able to achieve. We have to look at the base scenario, and then we model around that for the other scenarios. So basically, for the base scenario, we are saying that if we should continue with the current level of development in the energy sector, we should be hitting close to about 30,000 megawatts of installed electricity generation capacity by 2070. With the population projections that we've had, this will not be enough to support our development. So we look at the various scenarios that will help us achieve that. We have run 4 scenarios, but in the interest of time, I'm only going to talk about the scenario 1, which is the recommended scenario. For this scenario, we are looking at gas playing a major role in our energy generation portfolio, renewable energy also playing a role, and bringing on board nuclear energy. Just last week or so, His Excellency declared Ghana as a country that is ready for nuclear energy adoption. So we're going to adopt that in line with the energy transition plan. And with this, we should be able to be generating close to 400,000 gigawatt hours of electricity by 2070. This has a lot of advantages. With this mix, we'll be able to achieve high energy security and also be able to participate in the green energy market. We'll also be able to have lower cost of electricity generation that will support industrial development and meet all our future energy demands, particularly when we are going to make a shift towards e-mobility. There are some risks that are also associated. It comes with a cost, and then of course we need the human resource, the human capital to go to drive this. In terms of emission scenario, for business as usual, okay, it's not showing, it's a blue curve. You will see that even though we are generating just about 30,000 megawatts of electricity by 2070, our emission levels will be rising to almost about 200 million tons of CO2 equivalent. But when we do scenario 1, which is bringing nuclear gas as base load, our emission will increase up to about 2040. It will plateau around 2050, and it will be a sharp drop all the way to 2070, and that will enable us achieve the net zero that we're looking at. So even though we'll be generating a lot of electricity, in terms of emission, it's going to go down drastically. In terms of costs, for business as usual, not too expensive, we'll need around $200 billion to go to achieve a generation capacity of 30,000 megawatts. For T1, we would need close to about 300 billion to be able to produce electricity. In terms of investment, about $250 billion. In terms of electricity generation costs, this is where we have an interesting outcome. You look at the business as usual, electricity prices are going to go up. We'll be having close to about 7 cents on average. But when we do T1, this is going to come down drastically. We'll be having close to about 5 US cents per kilowatt hours of energy. In terms of, I've spoken about this, so I'll skip this. This I've also spoken about. Good. So as you can see on this slide, for scenario 1, as we hit 2040, 2050, we're going to be having a decline in emission levels, whereas in that of the base scenario, emission levels will be going up. And in terms of generation, the business as usual, we're having small generation, that's just about 150,000 gigawatts hour of electricity, but higher emission. Whereas in the T1 scenario, we'll be generating close to 350,000 gigawatt hours of electricity, but very low emissions. Now, what are the targets? We've come up with targets between 2030 all the way to 2070. We are saying that by 2030, we should have a number of our home appliances being in the best of class. We should have energy efficient appliances. We should also be able to have more than 60% of the cooling appliances, like the ACs, having the best star rating. We should have more than 95% of households, using electricity or having access to electricity. We should be able to introduce CNG fueled vehicles and trains for mass transportation. And then 10% of our electricity generation should come from renewable energy. 2040, we have targets for that as well, where we'll commence our net zero emission trend. Then we should also be able to introduce sustainable aviation fuel, as Tony indicated. Here we are looking at having biofuel blend with conventional fuel to make it sustainable. We should be able to begin the phasing out of our roads internal combustion engine vehicles that are run on hydrocarbons. As we move on to 2050, we should have more than 50% of water heating coming from solar energy. And then we should have more than 50% of metro urban households using electric stoves. As we move on to 2070, we are seeing that more than 70% of rural households should be able to use LPG for cooking. And we should have more than 98% of all appliances and cooling systems in the best of their class. So these are the targets that we have for the various years that we have modeled. We have to come up with policies to be able to support this transition. And we have anchored them around 4 thematic areas. The first is decarbonization. For decarbonization, we are saying that companies or industries that emit a lot as a result of their activities, they should be mandated to invest in activities that will help offset the emissions, i.e., tree planting, for example, could be used to offset emissions. We should also have natural gas playing a key role for our energy transition, and this supports the president's position that we should exploit our natural resources for our economic and social development. The other aspect is that we should aggressively promote afforestation to increase our carbon stock so that even when we pollute, we'll have trees to be able to absorb the CO2 emissions. We should be able to phase out fossil fuel vehicles on our roads and then introduce carbon capture, storage, and use technologies to be able to reduce emission levels. All this will translate into we moving towards a net zero. Then we come to energy access and security. Here we are seeing that we should encourage innovation in renewable energy technologies and expedite the process of exploring oil and gas for our developmental needs. We should also expand the gas infrastructure so that we'll be able to support power generation in the country. We should also be able to promote sustainable wood lots as biomass for fuel. As we are seeing in Europe today, because of the issue between Russia and Ukraine, gas supply to Europe has gone down. They cannot, guarantee that, and they have to go back to biomass to support domestic heating. So we also have the view that we should encourage the production of wood lots to support biomass for fuel use as a country. The next is for us to look at energy efficiency. Here we are saying that we should intensify the promotion of energy efficiency programs in the country and also encourage the use of energy efficient devices such as clean cook stoves. We should also ensure that the building code is improved to reduce the energy consumptions in public spaces, etc. Then for cross-cutting issues, key amongst the policy proposals is that we should be able to decentralize the energy transition implementation. We should have it done at district levels or at regional levels. We should be able to establish an energy transition fund that will support the implementation of the program. And we should also be able to promote low carbon system technologies to stimulate new business ventures. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is where I'll end it. We have the other slides that talk about the other scenarios. If you want, we can also share that with you. Thank you very much.